Welcome to Le Grand Voyage with Chateau Malatic La Gravière. The 17th of July, 1453, was one of the most important dates in wine, at least in Bordeaux wine. That was the date of the Battle of Castillon. It was a vicious battle and a horrific defeat. A brave knight was slain under his fallen horse as thousands of his men died around him. And it was also the end of the 100 Years' War and the end of England's 3-century-long hold on Bordeaux. Bordeaux city and the wider region of Gascony and Aquitaine had been English since the 12th century. That was when Eleanor of Aquitaine married Henry II of England in 1152. Reputedly, they served wines at their wedding from what is today Chateau d'Issin in Margaux. Initially, though, it was the wines of the Loire, not Bordeaux, also occupied by the English, that were the most popular in England. But after these areas were gradually lost to the French in the early 13th century, Bordeaux became more popular, and how? By the early 14th century, England took 90% of the wine exported from Gascony. So much so it had this huge effect on the region. The people of Bordeaux planted so many vines to supply England and Holland with wine that they needed to import food back and cloth and leather because there was no room to produce them for themselves. Millions of gallons a year were leaving Bordeaux for export markets. And this continued even in the middle of conflicts like the 100 Years' War. But gradually England was losing control of the region. By the Treaty of Bruges in 1389, England only retained areas around Bordeaux and Gascony in the south of France and Calais and Brest in the north. French troops regularly harried the English and their allies. This didn't just mean trampling through vineyards and ruining the harvest. It affected that annual wine fleet and so affected the wine trade to England and also the food trade back. Eventually the English couldn't hold out any longer. The French retook Normandy in the 1440s and finally captured Bordeaux in 1451. But the people of Bordeaux liked the English and they didn't want to be French. They'd been ruled by the English for 299 years and it had worked out pretty well for them. So they called on the English to retake the city. Now, this wasn't a prospect received with much glee in England. Very few noblemen had land in Bordeaux or a great interest in trading there. In the end, it fell to the 66-year-old Earl of Shrewsbury, Sir John Talbot, to retake the city in the wider region. Talbot was known as the English Achilles and the terror of the French. Initially he was successful. He took the French by surprise in 1452. All the French troops were in Normandy where King Charles VII of France expected an attack. So Talbot quickly recaptured Bordeaux city and swept out into the countryside. By Christmas, most of Gascony was English again and the wine fleet sailed to London with fresh wine. But Charles wasn't having any of it. He quickly turned his army and took them south. By the summer of 1453, he was harrying the English forts. Eventually, they besieged the castle of Castillon in early July. Sir John Talbot set out with a force to relieve it. It's a story of technological change as much as anything. The English archers were still impressive. They'd long been feared in battle. But the new French artillery was devastating. Talbot was known as a tough, cruel, rather sort of quarrelsome man, and he acted on instinct as he often had in the past and charged into these oncoming cannons. But this time the English were cut to ribbons. Talbot actually led the charge like a knight of old, but his horse was killed by a cannonball and fell on top of him. A French soldier ran up to the trapped old earl and killed him with an axe. Talbot was one of 4,000 Englishmen who died that day. Just 100 Frenchmen lost their lives. The story goes that the troops who survived holed up at the castle at Chateau d'Issin, home to the same vineyards that had made the wine for the wedding of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II 301 years earlier. The next day they plundered the cellar, took what barrels of wine they could, and they loaded them onto ships in the Gironde estuary before they sailed away to England. It's an extraordinary story, and I remember being struck by its symmetry when I first heard it, but as the wine writer Clive Coates once said, Chateau d'Yssain's history is long, complex, and has attracted much that is apocryphal. Either way, King Charles VII gave the chateau to Comte de Foix for his service fighting the English. The loss of Bordeaux didn't end the trade in wine between England and the region, at least other than for a very brief period in October 1455 when it was actually banned. But life for English merchants was hard. They had to buy expensive safe conducts. They were shaken down by French officials and had to wear a red cross on their clothes so they could be identified. There was no travel outside the city, and complex arrangements to land ships, and all their weapons had to be surrendered at the port of Blaye. But they persisted, and life did get easier. Today, if you go to Bordeaux Airport, you'll almost always hear an English accent, cut glass, talking about the wines that they've just bought to import back to London. Bordeaux may have been French since 1453, but it's still a thoroughly English wine. Anyway, join us again tomorrow for more stories from Bordeaux with Le Grand Voyage from Château Malottic, La Gravière. I'll see you then.